I watched through my kitchen window as the fuel oil delivery truck turned onto Maple Ridge Drive for the third time this week, and my stomach dropped knowing exactly what was about to happen. Sharon Carmichael, president of the Riverside Meadows Homeowners Association in Burlington, Vermont, was already marching down her driveway like a soldier heading into battle, her puffer coat making swishing sounds that I could hear even through my double-paned windows. The December cold didn't seem to bother her one bit as she positioned herself directly in front of my driveway entrance, arms crossed, chin up, ready to turn away another delivery that I desperately needed. My name is Zachary Oakes, and I had been living in this neighborhood for 5 years without incident until Sharon took over as HOA president 8 months ago. That's when my life became a bureaucratic nightmare wrapped in passive-aggressive notes and arbitrary rule enforcement. But this fuel oil situation had crossed a line from annoying into genuinely dangerous territory. The driver, a guy named Pete who I had gotten to know over the past few delivery attempts, rolled down his window. I couldn't hear the conversation from inside, but I could see Sharon wagging her finger at him, gesturing wildly at some papers she had brought with her. Pete looked confused, then frustrated, then resigned. He picked up his radio, probably calling his dispatcher, and I knew how this would end. 3 minutes later, the truck was backing out of my street, leaving me with a tank that was hovering at 15% capacity. I grabbed my coat and stormed outside, my breath forming clouds in the freezing air. "Sharon, what the hell was that?" She turned to face me with that infuriating smile she always wore when she thought she was in the right. "Good morning, Zachary. I'm simply enforcing HOA Regulation 47B, which clearly states that all deliveries must be scheduled and approved 48 hours in advance. You failed to submit the proper paperwork. I submitted it 3 days ago. I emailed you. I put a copy in the HOA Dropbox, and I even called and left you a voicemail. What more do you want from me?" Sharon pulled out her phone, scrolling through it with deliberate slowness. "I have no record of receiving any such notification. Perhaps you sent it to the wrong email address. These things happen when homeowners don't pay attention to details." I wanted to scream. I had her email saved in my contacts. I had sent it to the correct address. I knew she had received it because my email client showed it had been opened. But arguing with Sharon was like arguing with a brick wall that had somehow developed the ability to cite made-up regulations. "Sharon, my tank is almost empty. It's December in Vermont. I need that fuel oil to heat my house." "Then I suggest you follow the proper procedures," she said, already turning away. "I'll review any new applications you submit, though I should warn you that processing times may be slower during the holiday season. I'm very busy with my family commitments." I stood there in the cold, watching her walk back to her house, which sat directly across the street from mine. Her home was a mirror image of my colonial-style house, but she had painted hers an aggressive shade of yellow that somehow passed HOA approval, despite the fact that I had been denied permission to paint my shutters navy blue instead of black. The hypocrisy was stunning. Back inside, I immediately fired up my computer and sent another delivery request, this time with a read receipt and delivery confirmation. I also printed out my previous email along with the metadata showing it had been opened, and I documented everything in a detailed log that I had started keeping ever since Sharon's reign of terror began. My neighbor to the right, an elderly man named George Patterson, knocked on my door around lunchtime. He was in his 70s, retired from teaching history at the local high school, and one of the few people in the neighborhood who wasn't afraid to speak badly about Sharon behind her back. "Saw what happened this morning," George said, stamping snow off his boots as he came inside. "She's out of control, Zach. Completely out of control. Tell me about it. That's the third time she's blocked my delivery. I don't understand what her problem is with me." George settled into my kitchen chair with a heavy sigh. "You really don't know. She's still mad about the vote last spring. You were the only one who voted against her proposal to increase HOA fees by 30%. Everyone else either voted yes or abstained because they were too scared to cross her. But you stood up in that meeting and laid out exactly why her proposal was ridiculous and unnecessary. You made her look bad in front of everyone, and Sharon Carmichael does not forget." The memory came flooding back. Sharon had wanted to use the increased fees to install decorative light posts throughout the neighborhood at a cost of nearly $50,000. I had done my research and discovered that her brother-in-law owned the lighting company she wanted to hire. When I brought this up at the meeting, suggesting it was a conflict of interest, Sharon's face had turned a shade of red I didn't know was humanly possible. The proposal eventually passed anyway because most people were too intimidated to vote against her, but she had glared at me with pure hatred for the rest of the meeting. "So this is revenge," I said flatly. "Everything Sharon does is revenge. She's made half the neighborhood miserable." The Johnsons got fined $300 because their lawn was supposedly a quarter-inch too long. The Reeds got cited for having their trash cans visible from the street on a non-collection day, even though it was because the collection company came late and they had already put them out. And now she's literally preventing you from heating your home in the middle of winter. "Can't the other board members do something?" George laughed bitterly. "The other board members are her yoga buddies and her book club friends. They do whatever she says. We had a good thing going before she took over. The previous president, Mike Chen, was reasonable. He understood that an HOA is supposed to maintain property values and handle common areas, not micromanage everyone's lives. But Mike moved to California for his job, and Sharon swooped in like a vulture. After George left, I spent the afternoon researching Vermont HOA laws. What I found was both encouraging and frustrating. HOAs had significant power, but they couldn't interfere with essential services like heating, especially in winter when it could create a genuine safety hazard. Sharon was clearly overstepping her authority, but proving it and doing something about it would require either getting the board to act against her, which seemed impossible, or taking legal action, which would be expensive and time-consuming. I decided to try the diplomatic route first. That evening I walked across the street and knocked on Sharon's door. Her husband, a quiet man named Doug who worked in insurance and seemed perpetually exhausted, answered the door. "Hey, Doug, is Sharon available? I need to talk to her about the fuel delivery situation." Doug's expression was apologetic. "She's at a town council meeting. Won't be back until 9 or so. But Zach, between you and me, you might want to just wait until after the holidays. She's been really stressed lately, and when she gets like this, there's no reasoning with her." "Doug, I can't wait until after the holidays. My tank is almost empty. If I run out, my pipes could freeze and burst. That would cause tens of thousands of dollars in damage." He shifted uncomfortably, glancing back into his house. I know. Look, I'll talk to her when she gets home. Maybe I can smooth things over, but I'm not making any promises." The next morning, Thursday, I woke up to find a formal notice taped to my front door. It was an HOA violation citation, claiming that my mailbox was damaged and constituted an eyesore that degraded neighborhood aesthetics. I walked down to my mailbox, which sat at the end of my driveway, and examined it carefully. There was a tiny dent on one side, maybe the size of a quarter, probably from when the snowplow had clipped it a few days ago. It was barely noticeable, and certainly didn't impact the mailbox's function. The fine was $200, due within 15 days. I took photos of the mailbox from every angle, including close-ups of the minor dent, and added them to my growing documentation file. Then, I checked my email and found that Sharon had finally responded to my fuel delivery request. Her message was brief and infuriating. Request denied due to incomplete paperwork. Please include proof of insurance from the delivery company and a notarized statement confirming your intent to receive heating fuel. Also note that you currently have an outstanding HOA violation that must be resolved before approval can be granted for any deliveries. She was making up requirements that didn't exist in any HOA documentation. I had copies of all our bylaws, regulations, and guidelines. Nowhere did it mention needing notarized statements or proof of insurance from delivery companies. She was just creating obstacles to punish me. I called Pete at the fuel company and explained the situation. He was sympathetic but firm. "Look, Mr. Oakes, I believe you that this HOA lady is being unreasonable. But my company has a policy. If someone is physically blocking access to a property or threatening to call the cops on us, we can't complete the delivery. It's a liability issue. We've already sent trucks out there 3 times, and it's costing us money in wasted time and fuel. Unless you can guarantee that we'll have clear access, I can't send another truck. What if I meet you somewhere else? Can you fill portable containers?" "We don't have that equipment, and honestly, that would be a safety issue. Fuel oil needs to be delivered directly into your tank using our pumping system. I'm sorry, but there's no workaround here. You need to resolve this with your HOA." After hanging up, I sat at my kitchen table and tried to think through my options. My fuel gauge was now showing 12%. I had maybe a week before I'd be out completely, and that was if the weather stayed relatively mild. If we got hit with one of Vermont's brutal cold snaps, I could run out even sooner. I decided to go over Sharon's head. I drafted a detailed email to the entire HOA board, explaining the situation and requesting an emergency meeting. I laid out everything: the blocked deliveries, the fake requirements, the safety hazard, and the fact that Sharon was clearly retaliating against me for voting against her proposal months ago. I kept the tone professional but firm, and I attached all my documentation, including time-stamped photos of Sharon blocking my driveway and copies of my properly submitted delivery requests. Within 2 hours, I got 3 responses. The first was from Susan Miller, the HOA treasurer and one of Sharon's book club friends. She wrote, "I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding. Sharon would never put anyone's safety at risk. Have you tried talking to her directly?" The second was from Patricia Donovan, the secretary, who was even less helpful. "HOA business must go through proper channels. Please submit your concerns in writing at the next monthly meeting." The third was from the only male board member, Richard Hayes, who at least seemed somewhat concerned. "Zach, this sounds serious. I'm going to reach out to Sharon and get her side of the story. Let me see if we can find a resolution." That evening, Richard called me. I spoke with Sharon. "She says you've been consistently failing to follow procedures, and that she's simply trying to maintain order in the neighborhood. She showed me emails where you were, in her words, hostile and threatening." Hostile and threatening. Richard, I've been nothing but professional. "What emails is she talking about?" She forwarded me some messages. "I have to say, Zach, your tone in some of them is pretty aggressive. Can you send me those emails? Because I save copies of everything I send, and I've been very careful about my language." There was a pause. I'll forward them to you." When Richard's email arrived, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The messages Sharon had sent him were my emails, but they had been edited. She had taken sentences out of context, removed her own provocative statements that I had been responding to, and in at least one case, she had actually changed my words. One email where I had written, "I strongly disagree with this interpretation of the rules," had been altered to say, "I completely disagree with these stupid rules." Another email where I had asked, "Can we please find a reasonable solution?" had been changed to, "Can you please stop being unreasonable?" I immediately called Richard back. "These have been altered. She doctored these emails, Richard. Look at the metadata, look at the original timestamps. I'm going to forward you the originals directly from my sent folder. You can verify that they're different." To his credit, Richard actually took the time to compare them. When he called me back 20 minutes later, his voice was tight. "You're right. These don't match. She definitely changed them. Zach, I don't know what to tell you. This is beyond anything I expected. I need to think about how to handle this. While you're thinking about it, I'm running out of fuel oil. I need heat, Richard. This isn't just about HOA politics anymore. This is a safety issue." "I understand. Give me until tomorrow. I'm going to talk to the other board members and see if we can call an emergency session to suspend Sharon's authority on this matter. But I need to be careful about how I approach this, because if I'm not, she'll retaliate against me too." Friday morning brought another cold snap. The temperature dropped to 10 degrees and my furnace was running constantly. I could almost watch the fuel gauge dropping. I was down to 9%, and my anxiety was through the roof. I decided to take a different approach. I called the Burlington City Building Department and asked to speak to someone about HOA regulations and heating requirements. The woman who answered transferred me to a building inspector named Carlos Rodriguez. "Mr. Oakes, what you're describing is potentially a violation of Vermont's habitability laws," Carlos said after I explained the situation. "A residence needs to be able to maintain a minimum temperature of 68 degrees during winter months. If your HOA is preventing you from obtaining heating fuel, they could be liable. Do you have documentation?" "I have extensive documentation. Photos, emails, delivery records, everything." "Good. I'm going to open a case file. I want you to email me everything you have. If your home becomes uninhabitable due to lack of heat, that's a serious matter, and the town will get involved. Also, I'm going to send a formal notice to your HOA informing them that they cannot interfere with essential services." For the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope. I spent the next hour organizing all my documents and sending them to Carlos. Then I scheduled another fuel delivery for Monday morning, figuring that with an official notice from the town, Sharon wouldn't dare interfere. I was wrong. Friday evening, I found another notice on my door. This one informed me that due to ongoing violations and failure to cooperate with HOA management, I was being fined an additional $500, and that all delivery privileges were suspended until further notice. The notice was signed by Sharon and included a threat that any delivery trucks entering the neighborhood to service my property would be reported to police as trespassing. I immediately forwarded this to Carlos Rodriguez and to Richard Hayes. Carlos responded within minutes. "This is outrageous. I'm escalating this. Expect a call from our legal department Monday morning." Richard's response was longer and more worried. "Zach, I confronted Sharon about the altered emails. She denied it at first, then claimed it was just correcting grammar and typos. I told her that wasn't acceptable. We had a huge argument. She's threatening to sue me for defamation if I repeat any accusations about her conduct. Susan and Patricia are backing her up completely. I feel like I'm in the twilight zone. I don't know how much more I can do without destroying my own life. I'm sorry. Saturday was December 21st, the shortest day of the year, and it felt fitting. Everything was dark. My fuel gauge was at 7%. I had started keeping my thermostat set to 65 degrees instead of the usual 72, wearing multiple layers of clothing inside the house, and sleeping under extra blankets. I was rationing heat like it was the apocalypse. George Patterson came over with a space heater. Here, take this. It's not much, but it might help keep your pipes from freezing if your furnace goes out. This is absolutely insane, Zach. I can't believe she's being allowed to do this. The town building department is getting involved. I have hope that this will be resolved soon. Soon might not be soon enough. What if your furnace quits tomorrow? What's your backup plan? I didn't have a good answer for that. I supposed I could go to a hotel, but that felt like admitting defeat. This was my home. I had every right to heat it. Sharon was the one in the wrong, not me. Sunday morning, I woke up to my phone ringing. It was Pete from the fuel company. "Mr. Oakes, I just wanted to give you a heads up. I got a call yesterday from someone claiming to be from your HOA. She said that we're not authorized to deliver to your address, and that if we attempt to do so, she'll report our trucks as creating a public nuisance. She also said she'd contact the state fuel board and file complaints about our business practices." That's Sharon Carmichael. "She has no authority to ban your company from delivering to my property. I own my house. I have a contract with you. She's just trying to intimidate you." I understand that, but my boss is getting nervous. He doesn't want any trouble with regulatory agencies, even if the complaints are bogus. He's asking me to hold off on any more delivery attempts until you get this sorted out legally. "Pete, I'm at 6%. I'm going to run out, probably before Christmas." There was a long silence. "I'm really sorry, Mr. Oakes. I wish there was something I could do." "Have you considered switching to propane or getting an electric heating system? That would take weeks to install and cost thousands of dollars. I don't have weeks." After hanging up, I sat in my living room, staring at my Christmas tree. I had put it up the previous weekend, back when I still thought this fuel oil situation would be resolved quickly. Now, the cheerful lights and decorations felt like a mockery. What was I supposed to do? The town building department wouldn't be open again until Monday. The HOA board was either complicit with Sharon or too scared to act. The fuel company had abandoned me. I was completely stuck. That afternoon, I noticed Sharon outside, talking to Doug by their car. They seemed to be arguing about something, with Doug gesturing animatedly and Sharon shaking her head firmly. Eventually, Doug threw his hands up and got in the car alone, driving away. Sharon went back inside, and I wondered what that had been about. Monday morning, December 22nd, Carlos Rodriguez called me. "Mr. Oakes, I've reviewed everything with our legal team. What your HOA president is doing is absolutely illegal. We're drafting a cease and desist order that will be delivered to her today. She is interfering with your ability to maintain a habitable dwelling, and that violates multiple state and local codes. We're also opening an investigation into the HOA's practices. If she continues to block your fuel deliveries after receiving this notice, she could face criminal charges." "Thank you, Carlos. I can't tell you how much I appreciate this." "Don't thank me yet. Let's see if she actually complies. Some people think they're above the law. In the meantime, if you do run out of fuel and need emergency shelter, please let us know. We have resources available." "I'm down to 5%. I've got maybe 3 more days, assuming the weather doesn't get too cold. We'll expedite everything on our end." By Monday afternoon, the cease and desist order had been delivered. I knew this because I saw Sharon's reaction from across the street. She came storming out of her house, marched down to the mailbox where the process server had apparently left the notice, ripped open the envelope, and read the contents right there on the street. Even from a distance, I could see her face turning red. She looked directly at my house, and for a moment, I thought she might march over here and confront me. Instead, she pulled out her phone and made what looked like an angry call to someone. Tuesday morning, I got an email from Sharon. The subject line read, "Final warning." The message said, "Your continued harassment and false complaints to town officials constitute a violation of HOA conduct codes. You are hereby notified that proceedings will begin to place a lien on your property for unpaid fines totaling $700. You have 5 business days to pay. Additionally, your baseless attacks on my character will be addressed through legal channels. My attorney will be contacting you." I forwarded this to Carlos, who responded, "She's doubling down. This is not going to end well for her. Keep documenting everything." I also scheduled another fuel delivery for Wednesday morning, December 24th, Christmas Eve. The fuel company had received a copy of the cease and desist order, and Pete's boss had reluctantly agreed to send a truck one more time. "If she interferes again, even after that order, call the police immediately," Pete told me. "We'll have the driver do the same." My fuel gauge was at 4%. I had turned my thermostat down to 60 degrees, and even with all my layers of clothing and George's space heater running in the bathroom to keep those pipes warm, my house felt uncomfortably cold. Every time the furnace kicked on, I felt a sense of dread, watching that gauge drop a tiny bit more. Tuesday night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about what Sharon might do. Would she really block the delivery truck even after receiving an official cease and desist order from the town? Was she that committed to her vendetta against me? I couldn't fathom the mindset of someone so consumed by pettiness that they'd risk legal consequences just to prove a point. Wednesday morning, Christmas Eve, I was up at 6. The fuel truck was scheduled for 9, and I wanted to be ready for anything. I made coffee, got dressed in layers against the cold, and positioned myself by the window overlooking the street. George came over at 8:30, saying he wanted to be there as a witness if things went sideways. At 8:55, the fuel truck turned onto our street. My heart was pounding. I watched as it approached, signaling to turn into my driveway. And then, like clockwork, Sharon emerged from her house. She was carrying a folding chair which she set up directly in the middle of my driveway entrance. Then she sat down in it, pulled out her phone, and started filming. "She's actually doing it," George breathed. "She's actually blocking you again, even after the cease and desist order." I grabbed my phone and called Carlos Rodriguez. "Sharon is blocking the delivery truck right now, in direct violation of your order. I'm sending police to your location immediately. Do not engage with her. Let the authorities handle this." I called out to Pete, who had gotten out of the truck looking bewildered. "Pete, the police are on their way. Just hold tight." Pete nodded, but he looked uncomfortable. He got back in his truck and radioed his dispatcher. Sharon stood up from her chair, still filming with her phone, and walked toward Pete's window. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but I could see her pointing at me, gesturing at her phone, clearly trying to make some kind of argument about why the delivery was improper. The police arrived within 10 minutes. 2 officers got out of their patrol car and approached the scene. I went outside to join them with George right behind me. "Officers, I'm Zachary Oakes. I own this property. This woman, Sharon Carmichael, is the HOA president, and she's been blocking my fuel deliveries for over a week." The town building department issued a cease and desist order yesterday specifically telling her she cannot interfere with essential services. I have copies of everything. The older officer, whose name tag read Officer Brennan, nodded. We're aware of the situation. We got briefed by the building department. Madam, I need you to move away from this driveway and let the delivery take place. Sharon launched into what I can only describe as a performance. Officer, I am the duly elected president of the Riverside Meadows Homeowners Association. This man has been violating our regulations repeatedly and refusing to pay legitimate fines. He has no right to receive deliveries until he complies with our rules. I have every right to enforce our community standards. Madam, you received a cease and desist order from the town. You're interfering with essential services, which is illegal. This isn't about HOA regulations. This is about Vermont state law regarding habitable dwellings. I need you to step aside now. I will not. This is private property, and as HOA president, I have authority over all common areas and enforcement of community rules. Madam, this is his private driveway on his private property. You have no authority here. This is your final warning. Move aside or you will be arrested for obstruction. Sharon's face went through a series of expressions: shock, indignation, rage, and finally calculation. You're making a huge mistake, officer. I know the mayor. I know the police chief. When they hear about how you're harassing a respected community leader who's simply trying to maintain neighborhood standards, there will be consequences. Officer Brennan's expression didn't change. Madam, turn around and place your hands behind your back. What? You can't be serious. You're under arrest for obstruction and interfering with essential services. You have the right to remain silent. The next few minutes were surreal. Sharon actually tried to argue with the officers as they handcuffed her, continuing to insist that she was in the right and that everyone was persecuting her. She yelled at me that I would pay for this, that she would sue me for everything I owned, that I had just made the biggest mistake of my life. George stood beside me, watching the whole scene with a mixture of shock and satisfaction. The younger officer, whose name tag read Officer Lopez, pulled me aside. Mr. Oakes, we're going to need a formal statement from you. The building department will also need to complete their investigation. There may be additional charges filed depending on what they find. Of course, whatever you need. Sharon was placed in the back of the patrol car, still yelling, though I couldn't make out the words anymore. Doug came running out of their house, looking panicked. What's happening? Officers, there must be some mistake. Officer Brennan explained the situation to Doug, while Officer Lopez took my statement. George also gave a witness account of everything he'd seen over the past week. Pete, still sitting in his truck, provided a statement about the multiple block delivery attempts. Finally, with Sharon in police custody and the driveway clear, Pete was able to complete the delivery. The fuel flowing into my tank felt like the best Christmas present I could have received. My gauge slowly climbed from 3% back to full capacity. Doug approached me as the police car drove away with Sharon inside. He looked devastated. Zach, I'm so sorry. I tried to talk to her. I really did. I told her she was going too far, that she needed to let this go, but she wouldn't listen. She never listens. I should have done more. I actually felt bad for the guy. Doug, this isn't your fault. Sharon made her own choices. She's been getting worse over the past year. The HOA presidency went to her head. She became obsessed with control, with proving she was right about everything. I suggested she talk to a therapist about it, and she didn't speak to me for 3 days. Our marriage has been falling apart because of this stuff. After Doug left, looking like he'd aged 10 years in one morning, George and I went back to my house. I cranked up the thermostat to 72 degrees, and the warmth flooding through the vents felt absolutely glorious. "Merry Christmas Eve," George said with a slight smile. "You just got the Grinch arrested." I laughed, feeling the tension of the past week finally draining away. I didn't want it to end like this. I just wanted heat for my house. Sharon brought this on herself. She could have stopped at any point. She could have been reasonable. But she chose to escalate at every turn. People like that eventually face consequences. The rest of Christmas Eve was quiet. I spent it putting finishing touches on some gifts, making myself a nice dinner, and enjoying the warmth of my properly heated home. I tried not to think too much about Sharon sitting in a jail cell, though part of me wondered if she was still insisting she'd done nothing wrong. Christmas morning dawned cold and clear. I was up early, making coffee and thinking about driving over to my parents' house in Montpelier for dinner later that day when my phone rang. It was Doug Carmichael, and he sounded absolutely frantic. "Zach, I need your help. I know I have no right to ask, but I'm desperate. Our heating oil tank ran dry this morning. The furnace shut off, and the house is getting cold fast. Sharon usually handles all the deliveries and maintenance, and I just realized she never scheduled our winter fill-up. With her in jail and the holiday, I can't get any company to come out here. I know this is asking a lot after everything she did to you, but do you know any way I could get fuel today?" The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Sharon, who had spent over a week blocking my fuel deliveries out of sheer spite, had apparently been so consumed with her vendetta that she'd neglected her own home's heating needs. Now her house was going cold on Christmas morning while she sat in jail, and her husband was begging me for help. I should have felt vindicated. Part of me did. But mostly I just felt tired of the whole situation. "Doug, let me make some calls. I can't promise anything on Christmas Day, but I'll try." "Thank you, Zach. Thank you so much. I don't deserve this kindness, not after what Sharon did." "Sharon did what she did. You're not Sharon." I called Pete's cell phone, hoping he might answer even though it was Christmas. He picked up on the fourth ring, sounding groggy. "Mr. Oakes, everything okay with your system?" "My system is fine, Pete. I'm actually calling about a different situation." I explained about Doug and Sharon's empty tank, emphasizing that Doug hadn't been involved in any of Sharon's nonsense and was basically an innocent victim of her negligence. Pete was quiet for a moment. "That's some serious karma right there." "Look, I'm not technically on duty today, and we'd normally charge holiday emergency rates, which are expensive. But given the circumstances, and the fact that Mr. Carmichael seems like a decent guy who got caught up in his wife's crazy, I'll come out and do the delivery myself. Regular rates, no holiday surcharge. I can be there in about an hour." "Pete, you're a good man. Just paying forward some Christmas spirit. Besides, after all the trouble your HOA lady caused for my company, there's something poetic about us being the ones to save her husband from freezing. Maybe she'll learn something from this, though I doubt it." I called Doug back and told him the good news. He actually started crying. "I don't know how to thank you, Zach. After everything Sharon did, for you to help us like this, it's just incredible. Doug, people need heat. It's that simple. But I hope you understand that Sharon needs to face the consequences of her actions. I'm not dropping any charges or complaints. I wouldn't expect you to. Honestly, Zach, I think she needs this wake-up call. Maybe being arrested will finally make her realize she can't treat people the way she's been treating them. And if it doesn't, well, I've got some serious thinking to do about my own future." An hour later, I watched from my window as Pete's truck pulled up to Sharon and Doug's house and completed the fuel delivery without incident. Doug came out and shook Pete's hand vigorously, clearly grateful. The supreme irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. The same fuel company and driver that Sharon had turned away from my house 3 times were now saving her house from freezing. Christmas afternoon, I drove to Montpelier to have dinner with my parents. I told them the whole story, and my mother, who had been an attorney before retiring, was fascinated by the legal aspects. She altered emails. "Zach, that's not just an HOA dispute anymore. That could be fraud, forgery, depending on how the prosecutor wants to charge it. And the obstruction charge is pretty serious too, especially since she violated a cease and desist order. She could be facing real legal consequences beyond just this one arrest." My father, who had served on his own HOA board for years, shook his head in disbelief. "HOA presidents who abuse their power are the worst. They take a position that's supposed to be about community service and turn it into a personal fiefdom. I've seen it happen. There was a guy in our neighborhood years ago who started fining people for ridiculous things, just like your Sharon. Eventually, enough homeowners got fed up and voted him out. But your situation is extreme. She actually prevented you from heating your home. That's unconscionable." The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. On December 26th, Sharon was arraigned on charges of obstruction and interfering with essential services. She pleaded not guilty and was released on her own recognizance, with a condition that she have no contact with me and could not interfere with any deliveries or services to my property. The town building department's investigation expanded after Carlos Rodriguez discovered that Sharon had been engaged in similar retaliatory behavior against other homeowners. The Johnsons, the couple who had been fined for their lawn length, came forward with evidence that their lawn had actually been within regulation standards when measured independently. Sharon had apparently measured it incorrectly on purpose. The Reeds had a similar story about their trash can violation. Even more damaging was what they found when they subpoenaed HOA financial records. Sharon had been approving payments to her brother-in-law's company for various neighborhood services, totaling nearly $20,000 over 8 months, without proper disclosure of the conflict of interest. There were also irregularities in how she had been collecting and accounting for fines, with some suggestion that not all the money had made it into the HOA accounts. Richard Hayes, the board member who had tried to help me, resigned from his position and began working with other homeowners to organize a recall election for the entire HOA board. At a packed neighborhood meeting on January 5th, with Sharon notably absent, the recall measure passed by a vote of 43-7. Sharon hired an expensive attorney and began fighting all the charges, maintaining her innocence and claiming she was the victim of a conspiracy by homeowners who resented strong leadership. Her lawyer filed motions to dismiss, motions to suppress evidence, and even tried to argue that HOA presidents had qualified immunity for actions taken in their official capacity. The criminal trial was set for March. In the meantime, new HOA board elections were held, and a slate of reform candidates swept into power. Their first action was to rescind all of Sharon's controversial fines and to implement new transparency measures for HOA operations. They also formally apologized to me and several other homeowners for the harassment we had endured. Doug Carmichael filed for divorce in early February. I ran into him at the grocery store one day, and he looked lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "I'm moving to an apartment in town," he told me, "starting over. I should have done this years ago, but I kept thinking she'd change, that the woman I married was still in there somewhere." But the arrest, the charges, watching her double down and refuse to take any responsibility, It finally broke through my denial. She needs help that I can't give her. I'm sorry it came to this, Doug. I really am. Don't be. You probably saved my life by getting me that fuel delivery on Christmas. Not just literally, though that was important, but you showed me what human decency looks like. Sharon had me so twisted around that I'd started to think her behavior was normal, that everyone was just too sensitive. Seeing how you helped me after what she did to you, it made me realize how far from normal our life had become. The trial in March was relatively quick. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence. Multiple witnesses to Sharon blocking the fuel truck, the cease and desist order, the altered emails that proved intent to deceive, and the financial irregularities in the HOA accounts. Sharon's attorney tried to paint her as a dedicated volunteer who had made some mistakes in judgment while trying to serve her community, but the jury wasn't buying it. She was convicted on all counts. The obstruction charge and interfering with essential services each carried maximum sentences of 1 year, and the fraud charges related to the altered emails and financial irregularities added more time. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Judge Patricia Hendricks, didn't mince words at sentencing. Miss Carmichael, you were given a position of trust within your community, and you abused that trust in spectacular fashion. You used your authority not to serve your neighbors but to settle petty scores and enrich your family. Most egregiously, you deliberately prevented another human being from heating his home in the middle of a Vermont winter, putting his health and safety at risk. Even when ordered by town officials to stop, you persisted. This court takes such conduct very seriously. Sharon received a sentence of 18 months in prison, with credit for time served, followed by 3 years of probation. She was also ordered to pay restitution to the HOA and to me personally for damages and legal fees. She filed an appeal, but it was denied. I watched the sentencing from the gallery, and I felt a complex mix of emotions. Relief that it was finally over, vindication that the system had worked, eventually, but also a kind of sadness that things had escalated so far. If Sharon had just approved my fuel delivery request back in early December, none of this would have happened. She'd still be living her life, Doug would still be her husband, and she wouldn't be headed to prison. All that destruction over what? Pride, a need to control. A grudge over a vote that hadn't even stopped her proposal from passing. The new HOA board asked me to serve as vice president, but I politely declined. I'd had enough of HOA politics to last a lifetime. Instead, I agreed to serve on a community oversight committee to make sure nothing like Sharon's reign of terror could happen again. Spring came to Vermont, melting the snow and bringing green back to riverside meadows. The neighborhood felt different, lighter. People were friendlier, more willing to talk to each other, less afraid. The fear that Sharon had cultivated was dissipating like morning fog. George Patterson and I became close friends. We'd have coffee together on weekend mornings and joke about the whole ordeal. "You know what the best part of all this was?" George said one sunny April morning as we sat on my porch. "It wasn't seeing Sharon get arrested or convicted, though that was satisfying. It was watching everyone in this neighborhood realize they didn't have to live in fear of their HOA. We took our community back. In May, I received a check from Sharon's restitution payments. It wasn't the full amount I'd been awarded, just the first installment, but it covered my legal fees and the cost of the space heater George had given me, which I insisted on reimbursing him for. I donated half of it to a local charity that helped low-income families with heating costs. It seemed appropriate. Doug stopped by one afternoon in June. He was looking healthy and happy, more so than I'd ever seen him when he was married to Sharon. I just wanted to thank you again, Zach. I'm in a good place now. New apartment, started dating someone new, and I feel like myself for the first time in years. What happened was awful, but it freed me from a situation that was slowly destroying me. I'm glad you're doing well, Doug. Really. Sharon's in prison now, and I know I should feel bad about that, but mostly I just feel grateful that chapter of my life is closed. Her attorney says she's still insisting she did nothing wrong, that everyone conspired against her. She'll probably never accept responsibility. Some people can't. Their ego won't let them. As summer turned to fall and then back to winter again, life in Riverside Meadows settled into a comfortable rhythm. The new HOA board was efficient but not overbearing. They maintained common areas, handled necessary business, and stayed out of people's personal lives. It was everything an HOA should be and nothing more. December rolled around again, bringing with it snow and cold and the need for heating fuel. When Pete called to schedule my delivery, I told him to come whenever was convenient for his company. He laughed. No problems with the HOA this year. No problems at all. New management is much more reasonable. The delivery went smoothly. Pete pumped the fuel, we chatted about how things had changed in the neighborhood, and he drove away without incident. Simple, ordinary, exactly as it should have been. On Christmas Eve, I was sitting by my tree, warm and comfortable in my properly heated home, when I thought about Sharon. She was spending this Christmas in prison, paying for her choices. I didn't take any pleasure in that thought. It was just sad, really. All that anger, all that need to control and punish, and where had it gotten her? She'd lost her position, her reputation, her husband, and her freedom. And for what? What had she actually gained from her vendetta against me? I thought about the path that had led to all this. If Sharon had just been reasonable, if she'd seen her role as HOA president as a responsibility rather than a throne, none of this would have happened. The fuel oil delivery issue that had seemed so catastrophic in December of the previous year had been resolved simply and easily this time around because the people in charge were reasonable. The lesson seemed clear. Power, even small power like running an HOA, reveals character. Some people use it to serve others, some use it to serve themselves, and some use it to hurt the people they decide are their enemies. Sharon had chosen the last path, and it had destroyed her. George came over that evening with a bottle of wine. We toasted to a peaceful holiday season and to a neighborhood that had found its way back to sanity. "You ever regret how things went down?" George asked me. "I mean, a woman went to prison because of all this." I thought about it carefully before answering. Sharon went to prison because of her own choices. I didn't block fuel deliveries. I didn't alter emails. I didn't ignore a cease and desist order. I didn't embezzle HOA funds. She did all of that. I just wanted to heat my house. If standing up for my basic rights as a homeowner caused her to reveal her true character and face consequences for her illegal actions, that's on her, not me. "Fair enough," George said, raising his glass. "To reasonable people and reasonable HOAs. I'll drink to that." The next morning, Christmas Day, I woke up in my warm house, made coffee in my warm kitchen, and looked out at the snow-covered street. Kids from neighboring houses were already outside testing new sleds. Doug's old house had new owners, a young couple with a baby who seemed nice. Sharon's yellow house had been repainted a tasteful gray by the new occupants. The neighborhood had moved on. I thought about the previous year's Christmas morning, when Doug had called me in a panic because his tank had run dry while Sharon sat in jail. The perfect irony of that moment still struck me. The woman who had worked so hard to prevent me from getting fuel oil had neglected her own heating needs in her obsession with hurting me. There was something almost mythological about it. like a Greek tragedy where the hero's fatal flaw leads to their downfall. As I drove to my parents' house later that day, I realized I had learned something valuable from the whole ordeal. Systems of power, even small ones like HOAs, need accountability. People need to be willing to stand up when those in authority abuse their positions. If I had just given in to Sharon's demands, paid her bogus fines, accepted her arbitrary rulings, she would have continued to terrorize the entire neighborhood. But by refusing to back down, by documenting everything, by involving outside authorities when internal mechanisms failed, I had helped break the cycle. It hadn't been easy. There had been moments when I thought about just giving up, paying her off, making my life simpler. But I'm glad I didn't. Not because I wanted revenge or because I enjoyed seeing Sharon face consequences, but because standing up to abuse of power is important. It's how communities stay healthy. It's how we prevent petty tyrants from taking over little corners of the world and making everyone miserable. My mother hugged me when I arrived. "How's my favorite HOA rebel?" she teased. "Reformed," I said. "I'm staying out of HOA business from now on. I've had enough excitement to last a lifetime." "But you'd do it again if you had to, wouldn't you? If someone else was being treated the way you were?" I thought about it. Yeah, I probably would. I hope I never have to, but yeah. That evening, as I drove home through the quiet Vermont countryside, snow beginning to fall gently on the dark roads, I felt a sense of peace. The ordeal was over. Sharon was serving her time. The neighborhood had healed. My house was warm. Life had returned to normal, or rather, to a better version of normal than we'd had before. I pulled into my driveway without any obstruction, parked in my garage, and went inside my warm house. I cranked up the thermostat a couple extra degrees just because I could, made myself some hot chocolate, and settled in to watch a movie. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing everything in white. Inside, my furnace hummed reliably, burning fuel oil that had been delivered without incident, heating my home exactly as it should. Sometimes the most satisfying victories are the simplest ones. I could heat my house. Nobody was blocking my driveway. Nobody was inventing fake regulations to harass me. It wasn't glamorous or exciting, but it was everything I needed. It was home, comfortable and safe and warm, exactly as it should be. The story of Sharon Carmichael, the HOA president who blocked my fuel oil delivery and ended up in prison while her own tank ran dry, became neighborhood legend. New residents would hear about it and shake their heads in disbelief. People who had lived through it would share their own stories of Sharon's reign. And everyone agreed that the new, boring, functional HOA board was infinitely preferable to the drama and chaos of the Sharon era. Years would pass, and eventually Sharon would be released from prison. I didn't know what she'd do then, where she'd go, or if she'd ever acknowledge what she'd done wrong. That was her journey, not mine. My journey had been about standing up for my rights, refusing to be bullied and trusting that the system would eventually work even when it seemed impossibly broken. And it had worked. Not quickly, not easily, but it had worked. As I finished my hot chocolate and headed to bed that Christmas night, I felt genuinely grateful. Grateful for warmth and for a properly functioning heating system. Grateful for neighbors like George who had stood by me. Grateful for people like Carlos Rodriguez and Officer Brennan, who had done their jobs with integrity. Grateful for a justice system that, despite its flaws, had ultimately held Sharon accountable for her actions. And grateful for the simple, ordinary gift of living in a community where reason had prevailed over tyranny. The last thing I did before turning off the lights was check my fuel gauge. Full. I smiled and headed to bed, warm and content, ready for whatever the new year might bring.